Today I'm going to be talking to you about inclusive economic development. What's that, you say? Economics? Oh no, that's so boring. It's jargon. I don't understand it. Well, let's hold on a minute here. How many of you work and earn wages? Show of hands? Oh, that's most of you. What about those of you that shop at least once a week? Oh, that's all of you. What about those who pay rent or mortgage? Hey, that's all of you. These everyday things we do, buying, selling, traveling, banking, working, are all economic activities. And in that sense, we are all economic agents. Economics shapes the landscape of what we eat, where we live, what we dress up in, where we work, what type of housing, how long we will live, when we will retire, and access to medical health, amongst other things. Let me share a personal story with you. I was born in Turkey to a lower middle class family. I could not walk till I was 4 years old. My parents took me to the local doctor of the rural town we were in, and they could not diagnose what I had. My parents, even though lower middle class, could not afford to take me other places. They somehow scraped the money, found transport, and took me to a bigger town. There, I was diagnosed with rickets disease, and the doctor said they would have to amputate my legs in order for me to survive. And my parents, of course, did not allow that, but they could not afford to take me to a bigger city. I would be physically disabled now if it wasn't for my father's clever thinking. He made homemade casts, put me in it for years, and enabled me to walk. While my story seems like a health story, it's actually a story of economic exclusion. At the personal or the family level, it's about not being able to afford basic health care. At a societal level, it's about the lack of public financing for health infrastructure and health services. I realised these many years later as an adult, a lot of my work has gone into inclusion, development, economics. And there are many stories like mine from around the world. Economics shapes our life chances. I feel economic exclusion is really important for two reasons. One is it perpetuates a cycle of disadvantage across the lifespan of an individual. And secondly, it's about economic inequality in the world. Can you imagine what my life chances would have been had my legs had been amputated? Let me cover these 2 points in a little bit of detail. The cycle of disadvantage is a simple tool that enables us to understand the impacts of economic exclusion at the personal level. Economic exclusion sits at the heart of this diagram. It starts at birth, where you're born into a birth environment of factors such as poor nutrition, poor maternal health, poverty, and poor childhood birth. This results in early childhood vulnerabilities. It then continues to have impact into childhood, absenteeism, possible early school dropout, behavioural problems, and potential for contact with the juvenile justice system. It continues into adulthood with high levels of unemployment, lack of opportunity, poor income and poverty, poor housing, low life expectancy. And so it continues and the cycle perpetuates itself. And it's intergenerational. Studies from around the world show that the cycle of disadvantage is intergenerational. In Australia, studies of long-term and chronic unemployment show the impacts last into 4 or 5 generations. As a child of an immigrant to this country, I really relate to this cycle of disadvantage as I struggled to be included, both socially and economically. Mine is not a typical story. In the end, I was lucky. I was lucky to have good teachers who believed in me. I went to a school that resembled To Serve with Love, those that remember that. Putting effort into an immigrant child in high school who didn't speak English. I expressed gratitude for my life chances every day. While your life may not seem to be at the pointy end of this cycle of disadvantage, how many times did you wish you had more money to meet your basic needs? How many times did you say, gee, I wish I had some more money. I work so hard and yet I can't make ends meet. We are told that economic success comes from hard work. This is repeated to us in political rhetoric and discourse. If you have a go, you will get a go. There are many people in the world who have a go and still can't put dinner on the table. The trickle-down economics that tells us that wealth will come down does not trickle down, and the cycle of disadvantage continues. I don't discount personal effort and personal hard work, but that's only one part of the story. Social, economic, and political systems that enable a fair distribution and a level playing field is really what makes the difference. Let me now turn to the second point as to why economic inequality is important. Social exclusion can result and lead to economic inequality. We understand economic inequality through indicators such as wealth, such as income and poverty. Global disparity in inequality has been increasing in different speeds and magnitudes around the world, depending on what country you're in. Let me share some data with you. First up, global wealth. The top 1% of the world's population owns 45% of global wealth. 64% of the global population owns only less than 2% of global wealth. What about income? The top 10% earns somewhere between 20 to 60% of the total income in the world, depending on which country you're in. In terms of poverty, United Nations estimates that 1 in 9 people go hungry every day. 1 in 9, 11% of the world. What about in Australia, the lucky country? Of course, there is national disparity and economic inequality. In our nation, the top 10% own 53% of the nation's wealth. The highest 20% of income earners earn more than 5 times than the lowest 20%. And poverty persists at high levels at 10%, same at the world level, and unchanged since 1980s. Many of us do not realise the scope of inequality and economic exclusion. The way we perceive, the way we live, the way we talk about economic exclusion hides or underestimates its impact. Economic exclusion is bad for society. It has social, economic costs which limit growth, prosperity, and well-being. It creates a society of haves and have-nots which compound other divisions in society. Economic exclusion creates social distances between people. For example, what suburbs you live in, who do you talk to, who do you engage with, how do you engage with them or not. The greater the economic exclusion, the greater the social distance. This erodes our civic trust in each other at the personal level, at the institutional level. It limits our capacity to care for the other, the distant one, the one that you don't hear about. and we find ourselves as societies debating who deserves our help and who doesn't deserve our help. Some of the discussions around welfare verify this in our country. In the end, the cumulative impacts are a society without hope, without optimism, without social cohesion. In the end, we are all diminished. We need to start thinking afresh about economics, shift our thinking towards economic inclusion. Economic inclusion is not only about economic growth, but pays attention to patterns and distribution of growth so that a broader base of people in society can benefit from that wealth. It is about human security. It pays attention to our basic needs: jobs, housing, education, and health. Now, you might say, we've always had exclusion and inequality. Why is it so important now? The world is going through major global change. Some people are calling it the fourth industrial revolution. Many things are getting disrupted. Our lives are being transformed in significant ways, from the way you watch Netflix and entertain yourselves to the way you participate in the economy is changing. The biggest area of change that's predicted is in the future of jobs. The Committee for Economic Development Australia predicts that 40% of jobs will be automated in the very near future. Automated means machines will do the jobs that humans do. This is already begun across the world with major corporations, with automation being currently around 20 to 25%. 61% of our children will be in jobs that don't exist yet. While there are new opportunities, are we going to be in a position to capitalise on these opportunities and be ready for the new jobs? Can an accountant whose job has been automated become a robotics engineer overnight? I'm afraid not. The impacts will be greater in countries where there's ageing demographics, like Australia. What about our future generations? Will they be able to afford education in a world of major structural economic change and uncertainty? Will they have access to jobs? The world of the future is one of new forms of inclusion and exclusion. While I paint a picture of doom and gloom, it's not all doom and gloom. We are able to have inclusive societies should we choose to put measures in place. And there are numerous measures available around the world to shift our economic models to ones that are inclusive, so we can take action around them. The second good news is it actually makes economic sense to be inclusive. For example, Deloitte's Access Economics estimated that for Australia, being inclusive will add $10 billion to the Australian economy. That report was released only a few months ago. That shows the benefits of economic and social inclusion. At the beginning of my talk, I said we are all economic agents. That means we have agency. We can bring about change collectively and individually. But this means getting serious about economics and not dismissing it as too hard. It means understanding the nature of how economics works for inclusion and exclusion. It means understanding your personal economics, banking, insurance, superannuation. Understanding of these will give you awareness, but it will also be empowering. You all have a voice. Use your knowledge to put the spotlight on how economic exclusion affects you, your family, and your community. You have control over your income. Use your consumer power to promote and support inclusive corporate practices by our corporations. You're all citizens, you have voting power. Use that power to scrutinise government policies carefully and vote for governments that promote inclusive economic development. So the next time you watch the news, spend or invest your money or vote in elections, think about what it means to have an inclusive society. The great Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi said, "A nation's greatness is measured by the way it treats its weakest members." We cannot afford to leave the last person, the most marginalised person behind. In a world of major disruption, that last person may be you or I. Are you willing to take that risk? Thank you.